I'm today speaking with Vítor Gaspar, former Minister of Finance of Portugal, who just gave a seminar here at Bruegel to talk about lessons from US history for the European quest for financial and fiscal stability. Vítor, what was your main message in today's seminar?
I think that the history of the start of the US financial system with Alexander Hamilton is not only a fascinating story in its own right, but also full of important lessons.
In your talk, you emphasized, Vítor, that Alexander Hamilton thought very much about sovereign debt, the importance of sovereign debt for the financial system, and also the link between politics and the financial system in the United States. And he developed a vision of how the US financial system would develop and what would be needed for a stable US financial system to develop. Perhaps you can explain to us what were Alexander Hamilton's main arguments, how he wanted to actually create stable sovereign finance, stable sovereign debt, and how he saw the financial system to develop.
It is very interesting, and there are two completely different aspects of it. First of all, during the 70s, Alexander Hamilton listed a number of elements that the US financial system should have. The first element was sound public finances and a robust system of public debt management. The second element was a currency unit, a stable currency. The third was a central bank. The fourth was a banking system. The fifth was securities markets, and the last one was a mechanism to ensure the incorporation of businesses. And for him, he had a true systemic approach that would put the financial system at the service of economic performance and economic growth in the United States. Now, it turned out that the way he had to apply his program was very much shaped by circumstances, and that's the second aspect I was talking about. The circumstance was that because of debts incurred during what they called the glorious cause, and that was the War of Independence, the federal government in the US, as Tom Sargent actually very much emphasizes in his Nobel lecture, was effectively bankrupt. And so the Philadelphia Convention, the Constitutional Convention, was called to solve two major problems. Fragmentation of markets in North America, that was solved by the so-called Commerce Clause, and the public finance challenge. So the public finance challenge was the one that was first tackled in the order of the elements of the program of Hamilton for the financial system. And what the Constitutional did is, by giving the federal government access to sources of tax revenue, specifically trade tariffs, the sustainability of US public finances was guaranteed, and that made it possible for the Treasury bond market in the US to normalize relatively rapidly, and US Treasury bonds that were trading at very, very deep discounts started trading at par some 3 years after the approval of the US Constitution.
So what can we learn for Europe from this particular US experience? I mean, you mentioned that the national politics in Europe are still very important and probably remain very important, and therefore it may be difficult to agree on a solution after the template of Alexander Hamilton, which after all was also in a context of already an existing political union, which obviously we don't have in Europe. So instead, there could be other solutions for Europe, and you have reflected on those solutions with more national sovereignty, but nevertheless an integrated financial system, perhaps even a no bailout clause at a national level. So what lessons can we really draw from this particular US experience?
What I would say, Guntram, is the following. In Europe, the importance of politics at the national level, what I normally like to call the primacy of the national dimension of politics, is, in my view, substantially more important. It's much deeper than state politics in the US. Politics is always local, but politics in European nation states have a very, very long history, and therefore they're absolutely precious to the peoples of Europe. So that's something that I don't see changing much within our generation. So the question, the lesson, which I believe is most precious from Alexander Hamilton, is how can one establish a reputation for being the issuer of a safe asset? How can a sovereign create such a reputation? And what Alexander Hamilton did was, first of all, he managed the transition from a situation of near bankruptcy to a situation of very, very high credibility in bond markets, internal and international, and he did it by actively managing public debt and by using the way he managed two financial panics in 1791 and 1792 to create the very important precedent that US Treasury bonds were the ultimate safe asset, the ultimate collateral, allowing economic agents to get liquidity in a crisis situation. That does show that within a limited period of time, it is possible to establish a reputation. And please bear in mind that US federal government has never defaulted on its treasury bonds, and so it has a pristine reputation to defend nowadays, and that was something which I would call the heritage of Alexander Hamilton.